This story focuses on the forgotten, extraordinary logistics of moving massive amounts of gold and mail across a hostile continent right before the Civil War, a feat of organization and endurance that underpins the settlement and security of the West. The Great Mail Race, how a secret cross-continental relay of wealth and risk forged the American West. A non-fiction historical narrative. The Hook. Imagine a bank vault, heavier than a locomotive, packed with over $3 million in gold, the equivalent of hundreds of millions today, and its only security is a team of sweating, malnourished men, a handful of rifles, and a network of rickety wooden stations separated by hundreds of miles of lawless desert. You think the taming of the American West was about dusty cowboys and railroad spikes. You think the Civil War was fought only in the East. But the true, astonishing story of how the West was won, secured, and connected to the Union is a forgotten chronicle of speed, stamina, and staggering wealth risked on a daily, bone-jarring, continent-spanning marathon. This is the true history of the Butterfield Overland Mail Company, 1858 to 1861, the largest, most expensive, and most dangerous transportation enterprise in American history before the Transcontinental Railroad. It was a postal and banking miracle that linked St. Louis, Missouri to San Francisco, California, not in months, but in a near impossible 25 days, traversing a looping 2,800-mile ribbon of wilderness, mountains, and hostile territory. At its heart, this was a story of money, tons of California gold that propped the...
At its heart, this was a story of money. Tons of California gold that propped up the precarious finances of the divided Union and the nascent banking empires of New York. Every 2 weeks, the Butterfield Flyer departed, carrying not just letters and newspapers, but the fate of the U.S. economy. Prepare to meet the iron-willed man who built this colossal system, John Butterfield, a former stagecoach driver who mastered logistics on a scale few generals could manage. Witness the silent, desperate heroism of the stock tenders and division agents who lived on the edge of starvation and death just to keep the clock ticking. And understand how the shadow of the coming Civil War hung over the route, turning a commercial venture into a strategic necessity, a race against time and internal collapse. The Butterfield Overland Mail was not just a stage line, it was the West's original nervous system, a colossal feat of engineering in flesh, blood, and buckboard that held the nation together until the shooting started. And when the war came, this forgotten postal route and the millions of dollars it carried would play a definitive, final, and truly shocking role in shaping the conflict. Chapter 1. The Impossible Promise. The Divided Union and the Golden Question. The year is 1857. America is a nation of stark, painful contradictions. The California gold rush has pumped untold riches into the Union's coffers, transforming San Francisco into a city of global importance. Yet physically, California remains an island. It takes anywhere between 2 and 3 months for a letter or a gold shipment to travel from the Pacific coast to Washington, D.C. The two primary routes are an agonizing sea voyage around Cape Horn at the tip of South America, or a shorter but disease-ridden ocean-land-ocean trip across the Isthmus of Panama. This disconnect was more than an inconvenience. It was a political crisis. California felt distant, ignored, and vulnerable to secession or foreign threat. Westerners needed a tangible link to the Union, and the U.S. Congress needed the gold, which was essential for maintaining the nation's fragile pre-Civil War banking system. In the mid-1850s, the call for a great semi-weekly overland mail reached a peak. The question became, where? The southern route and the Greasers Trail. The choice of the route was immediately entangled in the most toxic political issue of the era, slavery. Southerners, eager to prove the viability of a transcontinental link through their states, pushed hard for a lower, warmer, and seemingly easier route.
In 1857, President James Buchanan, heavily influenced by Southern interests, signed the Postal Act, authorizing a contract for a service that must connect St. Louis or Memphis to San Francisco in no more than 25 days. This was audacious. Previous mail attempts took over 40. The route chosen, often called the Oxbow route for its looping shape, was a massive political victory for the South. It started in St. Louis, swung south through Arkansas, Texas, across the New Mexico and Arizona territories, via desolate military outposts like Fort Yuma, and finally turned north through Los Angeles to San Francisco. At 2,795 miles, it was deliberately long, avoiding the Central Plains routes favored by the Northerners. It was nicknamed the Greasers Trail in the press due to the high proportion of Mexicans and Native Americans living near or on the path, a derogatory term that masked the brutal realities of the route's landscape. The man with iron nerves, John Butterfield. The contract, worth an astonishing $600,000 annually, roughly $20 million today, was won by a consortium known as the Overland Mail Company, led by the indomitable John Butterfield. Butterfield was a self-made man from New York, a former stagecoach driver who had built a massive express and transport empire. He was a master of logistics, famous for his relentless attention to detail. His first command to his division agents was simple and absolute. Remember, boys, nothing on God's earth must stop the United States mail. The sheer scale of the preparation was staggering. In the spring and summer of 1858, Butterfield was tasked with turning a largely theoretical line on a map into a functioning bi-weekly transport system. He had to build infrastructure where none existed. 1. Stations. Over 150 relay stations had to be constructed, spaced 10 to 20 miles apart across 8 states and territories. Many were nothing more than crude adobe or log shacks in the middle of nowhere, fortified against attack. 2. Stock. He had to acquire and position over 1,500 head of horses and mules. This stock needed to be rotated every 10 to 15 miles to maintain the furious pace. 3. Wagons. He commissioned custom-built stagecoaches, the famous Concord coaches for the easier legs, and lighter, tougher celerity wagons for the desolate mountainous desert sections. These wagons were designed for speed, not comfort, and were often springless. 4. Men. He hired over 800 employees, including drivers, conductors, blacksmiths, and the lonely, hardy stock tenders who ran the isolated relay stations, often for months without seeing anyone but the passing coach crew. The contract stipulated that the service must commence on September 15, 1858. Butterfield had just 1 year to accomplish this colossal undertaking. He did it in less than a year, turning a wilderness into a highway.
The first run and the nation's gaze. On September 16, 1858, the first Butterfield coach left the Tipton, Missouri rail terminus, the actual starting point of the long trail. The nation held its breath. The stakes were immense: commercial supremacy, political connection, and national pride. The first eastbound coach, carrying precious cargo and a handful of intrepid passengers, left San Francisco simultaneously. The press and the public tracked the progress obsessively. Telegrams flew across the existing Eastern network, charting the coach's incredible progress. When the eastbound coach pulled into St. Louis just 24 days, 18 hours, and 26 minutes later, beating the 25-day deadline, the nation erupted in celebration. The New York Times declared the feat a marvel of American grit. The link was established. Life on the trail, a constant nightmare. The achievement came at a brutal cost to the men and the passengers. The 2,800-mile journey was an endless cycle of misery, danger, and sleep deprivation. The schedule. The coaches ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. A passenger would spend over 3 weeks literally living in the stagecoach, only to stop for quick, miserable meals and to change teams. The comfort, or lack thereof. The coaches were notoriously cramped. Up to 9 people would be packed inside, forced to endure the constant violent jolting of the unpaved trail. The dust was suffocating. Water was scarce, and temperatures swung wildly from freezing mountain nights to 120-degree desert days. The food. Meals at the isolated stations were barely subsistence. Tough bacon, corn pone, and the constant threat of having to eat jerky and beans. One passenger famously complained that he could not tell whether the bread was made of flour or plaster. The true unsung heroes were the drivers and the stock tenders. Drivers worked punishing 60 to 100-mile shifts, often surviving only on chewing tobacco to stay awake. The stock tenders, often young, heavily armed men, were assigned to the most desolate stations, sometimes with only 1 or 2 Native American assistants for company. They were responsible for protecting the vital stock reserve and the station itself. Their lives were defined by loneliness, the stench of horses, and the immediate constant threat of Native American raids or bandit attacks. The gold cargo, the real prize. The passenger and mail service was a cover for the Butterfield Line's true mission, moving California gold and currency. The official manifest listed a few bags of mail and sundry items. The reality was the secure compartment underneath the driver's seat and the iron-reinforced boot in the rear were regularly packed with millions of dollars in gold dust, gold coin, and treasury drafts.
The weight of this cargo was staggering. A stagecoach, already carrying up to 9 passengers in their luggage, would be further weighed down by hundreds of pounds of gold. The conductor, usually the highest-paid man on the line, was personally responsible for this treasure. They were armed not just against bandits, but to defend the very lifeblood of American commerce. The risks were everywhere. 1. Native American attacks, particularly the Apache in Arizona. The stage line cut through sacred and ancestral lands, inviting resistance. 2. Bandits and deserters. The route through Texas and Arizona near the Mexican border was a haven for outlaws who understood exactly what the mail coach was really carrying. The company relied on absolute secrecy regarding the gold shipments and employed a ruthless, efficient communication system to track the coaches. Division agents were empowered to hire emergency escorts, bury the gold, or abandon the mail rather than surrender the treasure. The gold was the engine of the West, and the Butterfield Line was its vulnerable 2,800-mile artery. The political knife edge. While the Butterfield Mail was a commercial success and an engineering marvel, its location remained its greatest weakness. The Oxbow route was deeply political, a compromise line that was always under threat from Northern interests who correctly saw it as a Southern advantage. As the decade turned into 1860, the issue of secession dominated all others. The Butterfield Line, connecting the Union's most valuable state, California, through key Southern and soon-to-be Confederate territories, Missouri, Arkansas, and Texas, became a major strategic liability. The company's employees began to split along political lines. In Texas, the stations were increasingly manned by men with strong Confederate sympathies. As the first states began to secede following Lincoln's election, the threat shifted from bandits and Apaches to treason and internal collapse. The last run and the seizure of the line. By early 1861, the line was effectively running through enemy territory. The federal government was slow to react, hoping to keep the mail running as a symbol of unity. The final dramatic chapter began in March 1861 when Texas officially seceded from the Union.
The Confederate States immediately understood the strategic value of the line and the millions of dollars worth of property, coaches, mules, and station equipment that lay within their borders. Federal authorities, recognizing the peril, moved swiftly. In an extraordinary secret order, Butterfield was instructed to immediately abandon the entire southern route and move the entire operation, all men, all stock, all wagons, and all equipment, to a new, safer, central route further north via Salt Lake City. This was a logistical nightmare far greater than the original setup. The last official coach to travel the southern route left San Francisco in early March 1861. It carried a special, frantic dispatch. The conductors were under strict orders to travel at maximum speed, avoiding all known Confederate sympathizers. But in Texas, the Confederate forces had already mobilized. Near El Paso and Fort Chadbourne, Confederate raiders began to systematically seize the Butterfield station's men and assets. The seizure of the line was not a single event, but a series of quick, targeted strikes. The Confederate military, desperate for horses, wagons, and communication infrastructure, effectively stole the Butterfield Overland Mail Company in Texas and parts of the Arizona Territory.
The federal government's attempts to reroute the stock were only partially successful. Thousands of mules, hundreds of wagons, and the valuable relay station equipment fell into Confederate hands, instantly equipping the early Confederate forces in the West with essential logistics. The race to reroute. The remaining Butterfield men, those loyal to the Union, undertook one of the greatest salvage operations in transportation history. In a matter of weeks, they had to establish a functioning postal system on the new central route, while simultaneously attempting to recover the scattered stock and men who had made it out of the Confederate grip. The Butterfield Overland Mail, the great symbol of pre-war American unity and commerce, was extinguished on the southern route, broken apart by the secession crisis. But the story doesn't end there. The central route, established hastily with the salvaged remnants of the Great Southern Line, became the new, vital link to the West. This new route would face new challenges: more aggressive Native American tribes, harsher weather, and the desperate need for speed. It was this new, truncated, and highly vulnerable central route that would ultimately give rise to the most famous, romantic, and short-lived chapter of the Western Mail, the Pony Express, a story that could not have existed without the massive infrastructure and the colossal failure of the Butterfield line. The Butterfield's demise was the pony's birth, but the greatest financial and strategic prize, the transcontinental wealth, had already been secured, and the true cost was paid in the blood, sweat, and failure of the magnificent, doomed 2,800-mile race across the heart of a broken nation.